One of my favorite stories in the book, of the 100, one of the interviews was with these two young guys at Stanford, Ankit and Akshay, right? Great, really super bright analytical minds, right? And they would admit that they were bright computer science majors, and they had a lot of what they needed before they arrived, right? But they started taking these courses at the D.school in which basically rule number one is start with empathy. And start with empathy, by the way, means you have to talk to humans, right? Ankit had a business in India before he came to the States, and he said, yeah, we had this great software company. He said, it existed for a year. He said, we never talked to a customer. He said, we worked on the API the whole year. He said, we never talked to a customer, and as a result, we never had a customer either, right? But they come to the D.school, and they take this class called Launchpad, in which you must start a business, 10-week class. You must start a business by week 5. And I don't mean write a business plan. I mean have customers, right? And so you got to start with empathy. You got to start talking to customers on day one. And Ankit and his partner Akshay, they don't even have a garage in the Silicon Valley. They don't really have a workspace on campus. Their apartments are too small, and so they set up shop in a cafe, an Italian cafe on University Avenue, which is the main street of Palo Alto, where Stanford is based. And Ankit says, yeah, we were in there pretty much 10 hours a day. He says, we're not allowed back there anymore, right? But so they come out, and so you've got to start a business, and so you make a pitch beforehand, and they know they can't make a nuclear power plant or something, right? They've got 10 weeks to have the business fully up and running. And so at the time, the Apple iPad is brand new. And so they said, well, we know software. Let's do something with the iPad. We might be able to do something like that in 10 weeks. And so they each go out and buy an iPad. They're the first kids on their block to have one. And they set it out on the table in the cafe. And they decide they were looking around, and everybody's reading the newspaper at the time. I know that doesn't happen anymore. But everybody's reading the newspaper. And so they decide they're going to do a news aggregator, an app that consolidates different news feeds. And so what they would do is they would prototype all day. They'd watch other people, and they'd prototype their interface. First was just Post-it notes. They had no software at all. But they'd set it out, and people would say, is that an iPad, right? And now they're engaged. And they start talking to customers, and they start doing their first prototypes, and they start handing people the prototype, and he said the modal response in the first week when they showed people their prototype was, this is crap, right? But they said by week 3, people were saying, hey, does this ship on every iPad, right? And so they're going along, iterating all the time. And so Ankit says, we were doing 100 revs of the software a day. And I don't say a word, but I think he must have been able to see the skepticism in my mind, because he says, no, really, I am not exaggerating, 100 a day. He says, I'd change the shape of a button, and then I'd hand it back to a customer again. I'd change the little interaction and hand it back. And so fully customer-driven, starting with empathy from day one, they create this news aggregator that you may have heard of called Pulse, right? And while they're still students, imagine this was a really fun moment for them. While they're still students, Steve Jobs, who is still alive, holds up an iPad at the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference, and it's got their software running on it. So they got Steve Jobs, who couldn't be bought at any cost, saying how great their software was. And so we write this whole story. It's in this book. It's this one, Creative Confidence. This is not really a book. It just looks like one. Comes out in October. But so it's in the book. We send it off to the publisher. And, traditional publishing, it takes a long time for things to have, ink on paper and stuff. But you send it off, and then you got a few chances to make fine-tuning changes. And so I called up the publisher a few weeks ago and said, better make one small change to that Pulse story. Because it was a good story before. They had 20 million users. It's all good. Big success story. And changed their lives completely. But I said, I think we should probably mention the part where LinkedIn buys them for $90 million. The great thing about Ankit and Akshay is they admit it, right? They will tell you they were shy. They were, geeks, I think is the word that they used, right? And so they didn't give up 1% of the great analytical abilities. But they layered on a new skill. They layered on design thinking, starting with empathy. They took the best of what they already had and added this new thing. And now they both say, this is how we solve problems, right? Of course, we still have the analytical abilities, but we'll start with empathy every time.
My favorite part of that story is Akshay comes in my office at week 5 of this 10-week class. He was a student who comes by, and he said, it's been a big week. He said, The New York Times sued us, and the San Jose Mercury News offered us both jobs.